Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live stream, which is part of the Uptime Labs Incident Fest 2025. Today, we're going to be talking about what great incident response looks like. And if you're watching this in the live stream, please post your questions and observations below as we go. We're going to be responding real time. And of course, if you're watching the recording on YouTube, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I'm Beth Adele Long. I work with Adaptive Capacity Labs and am an advisor for Uptime Labs, and I'm really excited for today's conversation. We have three amazing guests, all of them practitioners, all of them incident experts, and each one bringing a different perspective to the table. So first up, we have Sarah Butt, a principal engineer in the technology sector who specializes in all things incidents. Sarah has over a decade of experience wrangling incidents for large tech companies, but her experience in coordinating high pressure situations spans multiple industries because before her pivot into tech, she spent 10 years working as an audio engineer and production manager for concerts and events, including ACL Festival, Formula One, and live awards shows for MTV. So she's seen some stuff. Next up, we have David Lee. Until just recently, David was a distinguished engineer at IBM, so he has seen incidents at a scale that few people get to witness. Since leaving IBM, he's joined a crew that creates free monthly community dinners in a local small town. We were talking about this earlier, and he pointed out that in busy kitchens, we see all the same patterns and anti-patterns that we see in IT incidents: coordination, anticipation, initiative, fixation, adaptation, and so on, which I found really fascinating. And we have Stu Rimmel, a product and technology leader in financial services, who today is representing Uptime Labs. Stu has this unique advantage of having observed a wide range of people doing dozens of different incident drills on the Uptime platform. So he's kind of a field anthropologist of incidents. He's also a musician with a particular interest in improvisation, which is an activity that has a huge amount in common in terms of pressure, surprise, coordination, and adaptability with incident response. Thanks to all of you for joining us today to explore this question of what great incident response looks like. Sarah, I would like to turn to you first. Your professional focus for a while now has been on incident response and in particular on incident command. So I want to kind of poke at what you do and ask you, is an official incident commander role necessary? Is that a necessary part of great incident response?
There's so much nuance there that I can't get into. So let me talk first to what I'm going to skip over. There's a fascinating conversation to be had about what is an incident. What do you mean by incident commander? And what do you mean by necessary? And I'm just to smooth this out, I'm going to skip all those over and say the context I'll talk about here is a event that has unexpected impact that involves multiple teams needing to work together in a high pressure, time bound situation. So, if we're defining that as an incident, we'll go from there. Is it necessary? I mean, very few things are necessary other than like food, water, and oxygen. But I do think it's normally very helpful. In my experience, I've found it very helpful. I want to go a little bit deeper into what we mean by incident commander because I think that's where people can have a lot of ideas that I would like to, I guess, maybe broaden the spectrum of what we talk about. So when I'm talking about do you need an incident commander, there's a spectrum that I like to use around what do we mean by incident command. And over here is this like very light touch. I call it building the bubble or playing traffic cop, where you're facilitating things for a group of engineers. And other than that, you're really not, you're letting them talk directly. You're very much on the periphery, just protecting their space. Over here on the other side is this strong, active command posture where like you are the nerve center and the central pillar, and you're directing every single action in a very precise level of detail. You're every change that happens, you're specifically saying when it goes and how it goes. You're in charge of all the communication, who's doing what, people are raising hands to get permission to speak, what swim lanes are everybody on, are you on a subbridge or not, like all of that is being done by the incident commander. Those are two very different perspectives that can both be incident command or incident coordination, and there's this tremendous area of variation between those two, and that's the area that I tend to play in. And I think one of the things I've seen among expert incident commanders is they have the ability to tune their response to where it needs to be on the spectrum for the incident and even shift it during the incident, to figure out what they need to provide the incident. And I think the ability to do that is a kind of a cornerstone of a great incident commander. So I think having somebody that's able to do that and focus on the incident and see the incident in like this 360-degree view. Are we getting customer comms out? Which teams need to be involved? Are we fixating in one direction? Like having that person and ideally having them not be hands on keyboard to me is really helpful for the scale of incidents that I've dealt with in my career. Is it necessary? Like, no, I would say it's a very, very nice to have. And I do think it provides a lot of benefit. Now, with that being said, I'm speaking from a perspective of someone who works for large tech companies, and there's always nuance to these. So Beth and John have in the ACL training a fantastic example of a team that runs this incident with tremendous fluency, and they don't have anything resembling an incident commander. It's a totally different approach that works very, very well for this company. And so I think at the end of the day, like I am not on the sharp end of your systems. I can only offer general advice based on my experience, which is to say that, yes, I think it's very helpful to have this role, but more helpful than that, because if anyone ever says there's only one way to do incidents that's best for every organization, I do not agree with them. Best is to look at your organization and figure out what your organization needs based on how you're structured and how you tend to run incidents, and really figure out what's optimal for your organization.
I love that. I love how you describe the spectrum of like the incident commander isn't one thing. Like there's a whole range of behaviors that that can encompass. If those of you who have been following along with the videos that have been coming out for Incident Fest, you've probably seen excerpts of different people, including Sarah and David, running through one of the Uptime Labs incident drills. And as I recall, the CEO of the fictional company in that drill got really wrapped around the axle about how customer comms were happening, when and how customer support was reaching out to customers during this fictional incident. That brings me to a couple of questions that actually came in from festival participants. One question was about what is it that you look for during an incident to keep stakeholders happy during a product outage, where stakeholders could be engineers, leaders, customers. And I'll embellish the question a little bit because it also makes me wonder, when is it important to keep stakeholders happy during the incident versus focus on the resolution and worry about keeping them happy later? So, Sarah, I'll take it back to you and ask, are there one or two things that you do during an incident to support engineers in particular?
That's a good question. There are a few things that I do. I think just to give people very tangible things to do. One of them is that sort of bubble that I talk about. Like engineers need time and space to think, and giving them that protected space, I think, is very important. So, however you do that, I think that's really important. And that gets back into that when I talk about that spectrum and right sizing your command posture for your incident. Because if you have, let's say, a small team that's very used to working together and you try and adapt that really strong command posture, they're going to get so frustrated with you. You're just going to totally gum up their process. If you have 150 people on an incident and 15 teams and 3 sub bridges going, and you take this really light posture, your command structure just gets run over. So I think right sizing in a way that you don't frustrate your engineers is one thing I really try to do. The other thing I try to do is remember that people are so human, and that's everything from making sure people feel like they've got the place to say, I don't know, I need to escalate, any of those sorts of things, but also like have people had a chance to get water in the past few hours? Like dehydrated brains don't think well. Do we need to rotate people out? So I try to just support the engineers by giving them the space that they need via the right command structure or coordination structure, and then taking care of the humanness of them however possible.
I love that. David, I'm curious your thoughts on any of the stakeholders, and in particular, are there factors you think about when you see senior leadership come into an incident and sort of how you manage their participation?
Sure. Yeah. So just teeing off of what Sarah just said, referring to creating this bubble for the really hard cognitive work that needs to happen during an incident. Um, it's important to protect that and to realize that senior leaders, while they have needs too, but just by virtue of becoming part of the incident channel, asking questions of the engineers, you can really disrupt that important cognitive work that the engineers are doing, trying to resolve the problem. So you got to walk this fine line between giving stakeholders what they need because it's stressful for them too, while also protecting the really hard cognitive work that engineers need to do to get us out of this mess. And that's really a big part of what incident commanders need to do. Hopefully they have, in a big situation, it's not just one person. It may be somebody who's talking, specifically to the stakeholders, trying to make sure understand what they need and bringing that to them. But but generally speaking, it's important that the stakeholders understand that if we're going to get out of this mess, we need to let the engineers do their work without, you know, uh, without being affected by the leader's presence and questions and needs, and to address those through intermediaries that can summarize, that can do that without, without disrupting what the engineers are doing.
That really resonates. I'm also curious. So, your title when you left IBM was Distinguished Engineer, which is a pretty elevated title. Did you notice for yourself a shift in how people responded to you when you participated in incidents by virtue of your title?
Yeah, there was a point when I was managing teams, and those teams approached me asking me to be an incident commander on their incidents, and I was uncomfortable doing that. I did not think that I could play that role, wearing all those hats at the same time. Um, and I think, now in some circumstances, in some organizations, it may work perfectly well, but at least for, I had to think hard about, all the work, and trust relationships, power relationships, and all the things you need to do to get through incidents well, and whether that was compatible. And ultimately, in that situation, I thought, no, I don't think I can do this. I think we need to figure out a different way.
Fascinating. Stu, I'm curious from your perspective, do you have any insights on the customer communication side of things, how you manage those customer comms while the incident is in flow?
Yeah, so I think it's very similar to what David was referring to there and what Sarah was talking to as well. We often talk about incidents as an exercise in multi-threaded attention management. There's these things coming at you like a fire hose, and humans can only concentrate on a certain amount of things at one time. And the more that you can do to reduce the cognitive load on individuals, the better they'll be able to cope with the job at hand. So regarding customer communication, it's important to realize that it is a completely separate job to that of resolving the incident. It's all part of this big, messy challenge that is an incident, but it is a completely separate thing. So it does really help if you can have someone who can concentrate on that specifically while freeing up the brain cycles of everyone else to get on with the really important job of fixing the problem. And beyond that, obviously it helps to have an easily accessible and well-published status page, that indicates what's affected and in what way. So people can pull that information without having to ask people.
That
And beyond that, it's unusual for incident responders, especially in larger companies, to be responding directly to customers. So more frequently, it's a job of keeping your customer-facing staff updated so that they can proactively manage those customer comms, maybe through website updates, if it's still running, of course, social media, etc., and to give information and context to customers who are reaching out to customer services. So, and again, it sort of helps if you can have someone who is focused on that job of keeping your customer-facing staff updated, leaving the rest of your people to be focusing on perhaps the more important task at hand, which is resolving the incident.
A question that brings up for me is your observations from having watched a lot of uptime drills. In the drills I've seen, there's frequently one person who has this official incident commander role and one person who has this business comms role. Do you have a sense of the percentage of participants that really stick to those roles strictly versus kind of blurring the lines between the two?
Well, it varies. It varies immensely. I think in my experience, I've noticed more people sticking to the roles quite strictly. But actually, in the drills that we observed for this particular festival, there was actually quite a lot of adaptability shown and kind of reciprocity, where people were able to offer to take a burden off someone else for a period of time if they were kind of reaching saturation or becoming overloaded. So I think that's certainly a very good thing to do if you can.
Yeah, I hear you echoing what Sarah was talking about earlier, where all of these things exist along a spectrum, and as you develop fluidity and expertise, you're able to adapt where you are on that spectrum to the needs of the situation.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that comes with experience.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. So this whole topic actually brings to mind another question that came in from participants. This one I'm going to read verbatim. Kale asks, if we start doing more public incident comm during and after incidents, won't customers see us as less reliable compared to competitors that don't talk about it publicly? And how do we make good incident comms a competitive advantage? Stu, do you have any thoughts on that question?
This is a horrible question. But I will try my best. But I think I might not give the best answer here, but I can speak personally, and I can say I personally really appreciate it when companies are open and transparent in their public incident comms. Like, for me, my confidence and trust in a company increases when I see them being open and transparent about their issues. And I like this because I know that all companies are having incidents very, very frequently. And they're having incidents, especially if they're super successful. Like, the more successful you are, the more likely you are to have incidents that actually are meaningful for people, right? But at the same time, like, I realize that us and viewers of this webinar are perhaps kind of outliers in this viewpoint. Like, most people don't really think about incidents and reliability and resilience. And they will often associate a public incident communication with very negatively. So I think it's a difficult decision for companies when they're thinking about these things. And it really depends on your company brand, and I think above all, it's important for a company to be authentic to themselves in the way that they communicate. Some will want to communicate in a very open way because it aligns with their brand, and some will want to be a little bit more reserved. At the same time, it is a good thing to be open and transparent about these things. I just think it's more complex than that for those people who don't think about software resilience day in, day out like we do.
Absolutely. David, switching topics a little bit, when you and I were talking about these parallels between busy kitchens and incident response, you mentioned these patterns and anti-patterns that are common between the two environments. So I'm curious if there are a couple of patterns or anti-patterns that you think would be helpful for the people watching this to be more conscious of in incidents.
Sure. So one that comes to mind is this idea of fixation, or like when you become hyper focused on a particular interpretation of what's happening or a particular course of action, even when there's evidence that suggests that you might be wrong. And an example is when you persist with your original plan, even when conditions have radically changed, and that plan is no longer valid. Or if you're locked into a specific mental model about what's actually happening. So, in incident commanders really play an important role here in helping a response team avoid becoming fixated, or at least recognizing that fixation is happening and help guide the team to understand and kind of see the bigger picture. But it's important also to recognize that everyone's vulnerable to fixation, even the incident commanders. And so just being aware that this is a thing that happens, and trying to remain mindful of that is really helpful. Another important pattern that I want to mention is about how a team gets help. When they don't have enough expertise, or they don't have enough time, or they don't have enough access, or they don't have enough stamina to deal with whatever the situation they're in. I really believe that organizations that have norms that encourage people to ask for help and encourage others to drop what they're doing to provide help are going to have less business impact because of incidents than orgs that have norms that create disincentives for asking for help or providing help. And the incident commander here too has a crucial role to play in recognizing when help is needed, when the team is at their limit, hopefully before they reach their limit, enlisting the right help, and in helping that team coming in to get up to speed with what's happening.
That and like both of those things you highlighted have to do with this flexibility, like this ability to change in response to reality. Are there things that you look for to notice that a person or a team is reaching their limit? Are there any signals that you've learned to pay attention to?
Hmm. A really interesting question. It's not something I've thought about. I think it is something you can recognize through experience, um, and also through just knowing people, um,
Mm,
um, and how they work. Um, I think um, I think the tone of the conversation starts to change when people are reaching their limits, and you can see it in expressions and comments and indications of stress in what they're saying or how they're acting. Um, and yeah, so I think it's subtle, but you can detect when teams are reaching their limit
yeah,
most of the
that
time.
that that resonates for me. There's
Hmm.
an irritation that can indicate that
Hmm.
people are getting a little crispy.
Hmm.
Um, Stu, we mentioned earlier your interest in musical improvisation, which is a comparison that I really love because my experience is when a group of people are doing a beautiful job with incident response, there is this musicality to it. And I'm wondering if there are factors that you could talk about that support that fluid improvisational play during incident response.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess when you see an incident being handled really well, it often really does have this kind of fluidity, and there's almost a kind of telepathy between the responders, isn't there? It's less about everyone sitting around waiting to be commanded. Like as Sarah was saying, it's that spectrum. And it's more about people, they know the framework within which they're working, but they're getting on with the job and adapting to whatever arises in the way that makes the most sense at the time. I think in terms of supporting this, it kind of a lot of it goes back to this cognitive load and being able to clear the decks so the responders can focus on that task at hand, which really kind of nurtures this fluidity. So it's like imagine you're on stage trying to improvise, but someone in the front row is shouting at you. That's the equivalent of your stakeholder barking at you over your shoulder, right? Or you've got dodgy equipment, or you can't hear clearly. You're not really going to get into the zone. So it's the same with the incidents. Reducing all unnecessary burden and cognitive load is super important. And a good incident commander can really, really help with that. I guess the other thing to really I can't emphasize this enough is that this kind of familiarity, which breeds this fluidity, comes with experience and experience with people who you are working with in that incident context. So, it's about that initial common ground, that aspect of knowing each other really, really well, knowing everyone's strengths and weaknesses, which enables you to support each other when it's needed or to step back when it's appropriate. And this can only really come from familiarity and experience of working together. So I guess you can get this experience by whether it's in music, doing lots and lots of rehearsals in a rehearsal space, or doing it in a real performance setting. And it's the same with incident response. You can get this experience by, unfortunately, going through incident after incident after incident, or you can get it in a practice setting. If you're doing tabletop exercises or drills, that kind of thing. But yeah, I think the better you know your fellow responders, the more that kind of fluidity is going to be nurtured.
I love that. And that echoes back to what David was talking about with how you recognize if people are exhausted. Part of it is just by knowing the people that allows you to recognize signals in a way that you couldn't if you hadn't collaborated with them before. So we're talking here today about aspects of great incident response, but I want to highlight that there's a bit of a catch to identifying the characteristics in the moment, because good decisions can lead to bad outcomes and bad decisions can lead to good outcomes, which can make it hard to evaluate what was good or bad when you're in the heat of the moment. So, Sarah, I'm curious what you look for when you come out of an incident. How do you know whether you did a good job?
I want to rabbit hole in this question so badly, so I'm going to try and keep it concise because I'm fascinated by this question. And even as you were talking about it, I was like, man, bad decisions. Like, can you have a bad decision in the moment that, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. We're going to leave it. I think I'm fascinated with this question because what we're really talking about is measuring the performance of an individual who's existing as part of this complex socio-technical system, and how are you talking about their competence and their expertise and separating that out from the outcome. And that's incredibly hard to do because of how all of these things are tangled. So this is actually something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about for my employer, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But before I go any further, I think that there's like a sensitivity to this question because I want to recognize for anyone who's watching this that's a responder, commander, coordinator, whatever your title is, that like there's an immense pressure we feel. I firmly believe that short of like a few anomalies that are really HR and performance issues, like every single one of us wakes up every day wanting to do a great job, wanting to get our customers out of impact as fast as possible, wanting to make these incidents as easy as possible. Like we wouldn't do this job if we didn't feel that. And so when you feel like you've made a decision that has potentially led to a bad outcome, it can be crushing. Like I have had moments where I have really beaten myself up over things. And I have to go back and remind myself, and this is something I coach people on, like judgment is a time-stamped decision. We we base this on the information, which is often imperfect information that we have at the time, and we make the best decision that we can. And Richard Cook in How Complex Systems Fail, he talks about how every practitioner action on the sharp end is a gamble. And that's just given me a lot of comfort as I try and decouple, were things good or not. So having said all of that, um, I have thought about this a good amount because this is something that my employer asked me to think about. How do we define good in an incident if we're decoupling it from the outcome? And I will fully acknowledge that there's a law of fluency here that I fall victim to. I have often told people, I know a good response when I see it. And I think that kind of gets into a little bit of what Stu talked about of the incredible coordination and synchronicity that we see with these well-practiced incident teams. There's also just a fluency of when you've done this for, in my case, it's over 10 years, probably over 100 incidents a year. Like when you've done it, that you just know good, you've seen it. So trying to break that into components is a really interesting challenge. And that's one I've been working on for my employer. I don't know that we'll ever get it perfect, but I would love to at least get a starting point to help people, particularly people who are maybe a bit earlier in career and trying to develop some of that fluency. So what I can say about that project right now is that it's a very long document. Beth's seen it. It's about 12 pages long. It covers about 30 different categories. I am not quite sure what the final form will take. I'm currently getting feedback from friends in industry, and I'm also looking at other industries like air traffic control in the medical field and saying, how do you measure this? Because human performance, what we're really getting into is how do we measure human performance? But some of the things that framework is touching on is stuff like David brought up around, did you see and manage to help steer a response out of fixation? Were you able to recognize saturation? Were you using airtime efficiently? Were there parallel actions that, or series actions that maybe had the opportunity to be parallel? Was there planning and replanning and adapting? These competencies that we look for in a response, regardless of what the outcome was. So I'm excited about that research. I'm hoping that we get some great results there. The other thing that I do, and I don't think that any framework will ever replace this, is I go and ask people for feedback. I have a tendency, despite having done this for quite a long time, to really get in my head. If you watched me come off of that drill, and I think Stu got to see this in real time, I came off the drill and the first thing I said was like, I feel like I did terrible on that drill. And it took me watching it back a few times to go, oh, actually, I'm like in my head about this and it felt a bit unfamiliar, but I'm actually fairly pleased with my performance.
You were amazing.
So one of the ways, thank you.
You're amazing.
One of the ways that I get out of my head is I talk to my peers. I'm very fortunate at my employer that I have peers who have tremendous expertise who can give me feedback. And I do ask them for that feedback. So I get that perspective on the command side. And then I think it's very useful as well to recognize that we're only seeing our piece of the system. And so I try and seek out feedback from the developers who are on with me, if I have a relationship with them, if we've got executives that I was engaged with, our comms people, like whoever it might be. And really ask them just like, did you feel supported by the command structure? Do you think the command structure in my role was helping or was it hurting? How could I have made it easier? And try and learn from that. And I think that's like the ultimate test of my performance, right? Is did I make the lived experience of the people that I was supporting easier because I was there? And granted, there's like some hypothetical and counterfactual and such in there, but at the end of the day, I rely on that feedback to help define good, along with sort of the feeling pieces that Stu talked about, and then this competencies framework that we're starting to build that ties in what David talked about. So I appreciate them teeing me up very well for that answer.
Well, I'm really excited to hear you talk about that because I've been involved in incidents for years. I've watched people involved in incidents, and I rarely see people break down what is it that contributes to being able to do this well. And you've identified a lot of competencies. We've also talked about what a pressure cooker incidents can be, how stressful they are. And that leads me to a little bit of a provocative question, which um, is, are the skills and capabilities that are required in incident response, to what extent are they innate versus learned? And what are some ways that each of you have developed your skills or the skills of people that you've worked with over the years? Sarah, I'm going to go to you first and get your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a fun question. Um, it's that nature versus nurture. So I think that the desire and the enjoyment of doing this work is often innate. When I look at people I know who are great incident responders who have done this for a significant part of their career, and I do want to caveat and say, like, where this is a significant part of their workload, not like I do this 1 week out of the year type thing. When this is a significant part of your work, two commonalities that I tend to see is like they tend to be people who just thrive on solving problems. They love finding patterns and getting into novel situations, and they get a rush out of fixing it. That tends to be one characteristic I see. The other that I tend to see is they tend to have this temperament that thrives in high pressure situations. And it's a common mindset, I think, of a lot of first responders. My husband, for example, is an emergency veterinarian, and I think we have a very similar mindset there where it's like the firefighter where everybody else is running away from the fire and you're running towards it and going, that looks like the thing that I want to do and I'm good at. So I don't know that you necessarily have to have that, but I think for longevity and not burning out and all of that, I think it is very helpful to have that sort of temperament. And I do think it's difficult to train that. And I suspect if you don't have that temperament, it would be pretty miserable and prone to burnout to do because it's a high emotional load work. But the skills that you need, I think, are often learned. So when I look back on my journey as a parallel for how and how I've continued to mentor and coach people, like I got foundational training at my first tech employer that provided a great sort of standard foundation for incidents. And then when I came to my current employer, which was about 5 years ago, we do an advanced incident command training that's very thorough, that's in-house. That formal training was really beneficial to me. My employer has a very extensive drill package that we do for any of our new hires. And it covers everything from drilling on managing complexity, drilling on the technical details of our systems, drilling on managing some of the um, human elements. Like it's a very comprehensive package, and then we continue to train and drill people throughout. So I think that's been very helpful. We have different ways of giving feedback. We have command retrospectives where you can get feedback from people. We have feedback on those drills, and I am fortunate to work amongst a lot of people who have expertise, and I am able to learn from that feedback. We also have a really robust shadowing program. And I think, especially earlier in my career, being able to shadow and see people who had much more experience run these situations and how they handled it, all of that went into what made me the commander that I am today. And I've continued to really follow that pattern as I've mentored and coached.
Love that. David, thoughts from you?
Well, I totally agree that there are some people who are naturals at this and have an intuitive sense of what's needed, and some of those people really thrive in the role. But most of us need some training to, or at least some practice in order to do it well. And there's going to be some for whom the role is really, really hard, and maybe not for them. Um, but for most people, as Sarah said, training is incredibly helpful. And I'm just always astonished at how few people who have to do this work in our industry have access to quality training. And there's a lot of people who are expected to do it with and to figure it out on their own. And that's I think we're doing ourselves a disservice, and especially to those people. But I'm one of those people who did this without any training. So my skills were developed through practice, reflection, and feedback. Um, and also about 10 years ago, I got involved in the resilience engineering community, and this led me to experts, people like Sarah and others from whom I've just learned a ton. Um, um, yeah.
I love that. The value of community is so important in a role that can often feel isolating when you're under pressure. Stu, any thoughts from you to bring us home?
Well, yeah, just to say, I really agree with what David and Sarah said there. In addition to that, I think I'd probably say that beyond kind of professional incident practitioners like incident commanders, etc. For many people who get involved with incidents, it's not really their choice. They'd rather not do it, but sometimes things happen and they've got to get involved. And I think for those people, it can really help to give yourself some kind of exposure through practice or through lower severity incidents, because beyond the skills which can be learned, there's that visceral feeling, that pit of the stomach feeling that you get, that you can get better at accommodating to, acclimatizing to, and you can get better at dealing with in the moment. So it's kind of like becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think you can start to feel more comfortable in those situations. And I think practice is really, really helpful for that.
That really resonates. Sarah, David, Stu, thank you so much. This has been a delightful conversation. And thank you to everyone who is watching for joining Uptime Labs Incident Fest 2025, where we're celebrating the people who handle software incidents every day, every night around the world. If you are curious what it's like to practice your incident response skills in a drill that feels like the real thing, that is easy now, thanks to Uptime Labs. You can just go to uptimelabs.io, click try it for free, and demo the Uptime Labs platform. In the meantime, I hope to see you at the next live stream. Bye, everyone.